I didn't cry. I counted. There were 42 people in that conference room on the 32nd floor of our headquarters in downtown Chicago, and I counted every single one of them while my father stood at the front in his charcoal suit and pinned a brass nameplate onto a walnut placard that read, Chief Executive Officer Sutton Reinhardt. My sister's name, not mine. I counted the senior engineers who had reported to me for 8 years. I counted the 3 board members who had once toasted me at a private dinner in Lake Forest, telling me I'd built something that would outlive all of us. I counted the catering staff arranging the Mosa flutes on the far credenza, and the photographer my mother had hired without telling me, and the junior associate from legal who kept glancing at me like she was watching a deer cross an interstate. Then I counted the seconds it took my mother to walk over and squeeze my shoulder the way she used to squeeze it when I was 9 and had lost a spelling bee. Don't make this hard, sweetheart, she said. Her perfume was the same one she'd worn to my college graduation. Tea rose and something powdery. Your sister has the vision now. You were always our wonderful little engineer, our builder. That's enough, isn't it? I didn't answer. Across the room, my sister was laughing at something the chairman had said, her hand resting lightly on his forearm, the way she'd learned to do at the country club in Winnetka when she was 16 and bored and needed adults to like her. She caught my eye over the rim of her champagne glass and smiled, not cruelly, worse than cruelly, pityingly. My name is Halston Reinhardt. I am 32 years old. I founded Reinhardt Aeronautic Systems in the basement of a rental house in Champaign, Illinois, when I was 23 years old and had just finished my master's at the University of Illinois. I wrote the first 4,800 lines of code for our flight stabilization software on a refurbished ThinkPad my grandmother had given me before she died. I signed our first contract with a regional carrier in Wisconsin from the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel because the Wi-Fi at my apartment had been cut off for non-payment. I hired our first 11 employees out of a co-working space in Evanston that smelled like burnt espresso and wet carpet. I closed our Series B from a hospital chair in Rochester, Minnesota, while my father was recovering from his second heart attack because he asked me to, because he said he couldn't trust anyone else with it. The company was valued at $512 million on the morning of that announcement, and my parents were giving it to my sister. My sister, who had spent the last decade in Manhattan working as something called a brand strategist for a luxury handbag company. My sister, who had never written a line of code, never read a balance sheet, never sat through a 6-hour FAA certification meeting. My sister, who had flown into O'Hare 2 weeks before, taken one tour of our facility in Schaumburg, and announced at family dinner that she thought the lobby needed more white space and that our logo was giving early 2000s. My father straightened his tie at the podium and tapped the microphone twice. As many of you know, he said in the voice he used for shareholder calls, this company has been a family endeavor from the very beginning. My daughter Halston has been an extraordinary contributor to our technical foundation, and we are so proud of everything she has built. But the next chapter of Reinhardt Aeronautic requires a different kind of leadership, a vision, a face, and we are confident that Sutton, with her background in brand and her instinct for the future, is the right person to carry us forward. The room clapped, not enthusiastically, politely, the way you clap at a funeral when someone's nephew reads a poem. A man I'd hired 6 years earlier, our chief technology officer, would not meet my eyes. My father turned toward me. He was smiling the smile he used at Easter and at Thanksgiving and at the wakes of his old fraternity brothers. A smile that meant we will not be discussing this further. Halston, sweetheart, why don't you come up and say a few words for your sister? I looked at him. I looked at my mother, who was dabbing the corner of her eye with a folded napkin from the catering table, as to my sister, who was already half-turned to a board member, mid-laugh, not even waiting for me to walk up. And I said, very calmly, I don't think I will. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something is about to break. My father's smile tightened. Halston. I'm going to step out for a moment, I said. I'll be back. I picked up my handbag from the chair beside me. It was a navy leather thing my sister had given me for Christmas. Ironically, I think, with a card that said, "For your big girl meetings." I had used it exactly once. Today, I walked out of the conference room. I walked past the receptionist, Marlena, who had worked for me for 7 years, and who quietly said, "Ms. Reinhardt, are you all right?" And to whom I said, "I'm fine, Marlena. I'll be right back." I took the elevator down to the parking garage. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, a 5-year-old Audi I had bought used because I'd been pouring everything back into the company, and I put both hands on the steering wheel, and I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not call anyone in my family. Instead, I called my attorney. His name was Ferris Caldwell, and he had been representing me personally since I was 24 years old. He was a partner at a firm in the Loop, 68 years old, a former federal prosecutor, and he had been waiting for this phone call for almost 6 years. He picked up on the second ring. "Halston, they did it." There was a long pause on the other end. I heard him exhale. "Today, just now." He announced Sutton as CEO, effective immediately. "He hasn't shown me any paperwork. He hasn't asked me to sign anything. He's announcing it like it's already done." Ferris was quiet for another beat. "Where are you right now?" "In my car." "In the parking garage." "Are you safe? Can you drive?" "I'm fine." "Come to my office. Don't go back upstairs. Don't sign anything. If anyone hands you a document, anyone, Halston, your mother, your father, your sister, a stranger in the lobby, you do not sign it. You do not initial it. You do not even hold it." "I know. I'll have everything ready when you get here." "Ferris." "Yes, tell me one more time." He understood what I was asking. He had been my lawyer long enough to understand exactly what I was asking. And he said, very quietly, in the voice of a man who had been holding a secret for almost 6 years and was finally going to be allowed to use it, "You own 63%, Halston. Fully diluted. Voting and economic. They cannot give your sister anything. They never could." I closed my eyes. "Drive carefully," he said. And he hung up. I want to tell you about the night I made that arrangement, because I think it matters. I think the people who watch these stories sometimes think the woman in the chair is some kind of genius who saw everything coming. I wasn't a genius. I was tired. I was 26 years old, and I was tired in a way that I think only oldest daughters of difficult parents can really understand. The kind of tired that lives in your jawbone. It was 2020. The pandemic had just hit. Reinhardt Aeronautic was bleeding cash because the airline industry had collapsed overnight, and my father, who at that point still held the title of chairman, but who hadn't written a line of code or closed a deal in 15 years, told me at a Sunday dinner in their house in Lake Forest that he and my mother had decided to transition more equity to Sutton to keep things fair between you girls. Sutton wasn't even there. She was in Manhattan. She didn't know what equity was. She thought stock was something you bought at Charles Schwab when you wanted to feel grown up. I had put down my fork. I had said, "Dad, I founded the company. You and Mom put in $200,000 in 2014 in exchange for non-voting preferred shares. That's it. That's the entire family contribution. Sutton has no claim to anything." My father had said in that voice, "Halston, we are not having this conversation. Family is family. You are being selfish." My mother had said, "Sweetheart, you can afford to be generous." And I had driven home that night through a snowstorm on I-94 with my hand shaking on the steering wheel. And at a red light somewhere outside of Glenview, I had opened my phone, and I had called the only adult in my life who had ever taken me seriously. Ferris had answered the phone at 11 p.m. on a Sunday night because that's the kind of attorney he was. I had said, "I think my parents are going to try to take my company from me." He had said, "Then we are going to make sure they cannot." What we did over the following 18 months was not illegal. It was not even particularly clever. It was just thorough. We restructured the cap table during a routine Series C raise. We moved my personal common shares into a single-member LLC in Delaware. We negotiated, as a condition of the C round, for a class of supervoting shares to be issued exclusively to the founder. We rewrote the bylaws. We drafted a shareholder agreement that all parties signed, including my father, who signed without reading it because by 2021 he had already stopped pretending to read anything that came across his desk and was spending most of his time in Florida. By the end of 2021, I owned 63% of Reinhardt Aeronautics Systems on a fully diluted basis. My parents, combined, owned 11% of non-voting preferred. The remaining 26% was distributed among employees and our Series A and B investors. My father did not know any of this. My mother did not know any of this. My sister, of course, did not know any of this. And I had not told them, not once in almost 6 years. Not because I was plotting. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sitting in a leather chair somewhere stroking a cat. I was running a company. I was building flight stabilization systems that kept airplanes from crashing. I was hiring people and firing people and firing people and flying to Wichita and to Toulouse and to Seoul. I didn't think about my parents most days. I didn't have time. But every 6 months, like clockwork, Ferris would email me a one-line message that just said, "Confirm cap table." And I would write back, "Confirmed." I drove from the parking garage to Ferris's office in 23 minutes. I remember because I kept looking at the clock on the dashboard. I drove down Lakeshore Drive with the water on my left, gray and choppy under a gray November sky, and I thought about my grandmother. My grandmother, my father's mother, had been the one who taught me to code. She had been a programmer at IBM in the 1960s, one of 3 women on a team of 40, and she had retired wealthy and bitter and had spent the last 15 years of her life teaching me everything she knew about computers and about men who took credit for women's work. She had given me that ThinkPad on my 18th birthday, and she had said, "Halston, listen to me. Build something nobody can take from you, and put your name on it in a way they can't scratch off." She had died the year before I founded the company. I had thought about her at every funding round. I parked in the garage of Ferris's building. I rode the elevator up to the 44th floor. His assistant, a woman in her 50s named Rosalind, whom I adored, hugged me in the lobby without saying anything and led me down the hall to the conference room with the view of Millennium Park. Ferris was already there. So were 2 associates I'd never met. Both young women, both with laptops open. The walnut table in front of them was covered in tabbed binders. Ferris stood up when I walked in. "Sit down, Halston. Drink some water. Take a breath." I sat down. I drank the water. I took a breath. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. "This is the current cap table as of close of business yesterday. Notarized, filed, audited by an independent firm last month as we agreed." I looked at the page. There it was. 63.1%. Founder common, super voting. My name. My LLC. "Now," he said, "what do you want to do?" I had been thinking about this question for the entire 23-minute drive, possibly for longer, possibly for 6 years. "I want to call a special board meeting," I said. "Today, right now." "On what basis?" "Material misrepresentation by the chairman. Unauthorized public announcement of executive succession without board approval. Breach of fiduciary duty." He nodded. One of the young associates began typing. "I want my father removed as chairman." He nodded again. "I want my mother's non-voting preferred shares to remain intact. I'm not punishing her, but I want a letter to go to her from this firm, today, in writing, making clear that she has no governance role and no claim to any operational decision-making, and that any future attempt to interfere will be treated as tortious interference. Done. I want a cease and desist sent to my sister. She is not to enter the building. She is not to use any company email. She is not to issue any statement, internal or external, regarding her supposed role at the company. If she has been given a badge, it is to be deactivated by end of day." The second associate was typing now, too. "I want Marlena, our receptionist, to be the one who calls security to deactivate the badge, not someone from HR. Marlena! She'll know why." Ferris almost smiled. "And then," I said, "I want to go back to that conference room." He looked up. "Halston, are you sure?" They invited 42 people to watch them give my company to my sister. I'd like those same 42 people to be in the room when I correct the record. He looked at me for a long moment. Drink some more water, he said. We worked for 3 hours. Calls were made. The board was convened by emergency video conference at 2:15 in the afternoon. The 5 outside directors, 3 of whom had once been my mentors and 2 of whom had once been my father's golf partners, listened to Ferris lay out the cap table, the bylaws, the shareholder agreement, and the unauthorized announcement in his quiet federal prosecutor voice. When he was done, there was a silence on the call that I will remember for the rest of my life. And then the lead director, a woman named Henrietta Coyle, who had been the CFO of a Fortune 100 company before she retired, said, "Halston, we are so sorry. We had no idea your father was going to do this. The board did not authorize it. The board could not have authorized it. We owe you an immediate vote of confidence and a public correction." The vote was unanimous. 5-0. My father's name was not on the call. My father was no longer chairman. By 4:30 p.m., the cease and desist had been delivered by courier to my sister's hotel room at the Peninsula. By 4:45, her badge had been deactivated. By 500, an internal memo had gone out to all 412 employees of Reinhardt Aeronautics Systems, signed by Henrietta Coyle as acting chair of the board, confirming that the morning's announcement had been made in error and that the founder and CEO remained and would remain Halston Reinhardt. At 5:30, I walked back into the lobby of my own building. Marlena stood up from behind the reception desk when she saw me. She didn't say anything. She just nodded once, very small, and then she sat back down and her hands were shaking on her keyboard. I rode the elevator up to the 32nd floor. My parents and my sister were still in the conference room. The catering had been cleared. The mimosa flutes were gone. Most of the 42 attendees had drifted back to their offices, but my father had apparently kept his inner circle, 3 board members, 2 senior partners from his country club who had been invited as guests. The chairman emeritus of a competing firm whom my father had been wooing for years, at the table. He was telling a story. He was laughing. He was holding court. He looked up when I came in. The laughter died. "Halston, there you are. We were worried about you, sweetheart. Sit down. Have something to eat. We'll get this all sorted out as a family." I did not sit down. I walked to the front of the room, where the brass nameplate with my sister's name was still on the walnut placard. I picked up the nameplate. I dropped it into the waste bin under the credenza. My mother gasped. My sister stood up. "Halston, what the hell? Sit down, Sutton." She sat down. I don't think anyone had ever told her to sit down before in her life. I turned to my father. At 2:15 this afternoon, I said, "The board of directors of Reinhardt Aeronautics Systems convened an emergency session. The board voted unanimously to remove you as chairman, effective immediately. The board also voted to confirm me as chief executive officer and to issue a public correction to this morning's announcement, which was made without board authorization and which constituted a breach of your fiduciary duty to this company and to its shareholders." My father's face did not change at first. He thought I was bluffing. "That is not possible," he said. "I am the chairman. I am the largest shareholder." "You're not the largest shareholder. Halston, you have never been the largest shareholder. You and Mom hold 11% of non-voting preferred. You have no governance rights. You never did." "That is not. In 2014, you wrote me a check for $200,000. You received Series C preferred shares with no voting rights and no anti-dilution protection. You signed the paperwork yourself. You can ask Ferris Caldwell for a copy. I imagine you'll be talking to him quite a bit in the coming weeks." My father stood up. "Halston, stop this. Whatever you think you're doing, stop. Your sister." "My sister owns 0 shares of this company. She has never owned any shares of this company. She has never owned any shares of this company. You cannot give her something you do not own." It was at this moment that my father's face changed. The color left it. Not slowly. All at once. As if someone had pulled a plug. He went the color of cold oatmeal. And he put one hand on the back of his chair and he sat down very, very carefully. My mother said, "Houston, please." "I'm not finished, Mom." "Houston, your father has been under so much stress. I sat in a hospital chair in Rochester for 9 days when Dad had his second heart attack. I closed our Series B from that chair. I'm aware of his stress." She had no answer for that. She had never had an answer for that. I turned to my sister. She was crying. Not the controlled crying she did at weddings. Real crying, not the controlled crying she did at weddings. Real crying, mascara streaked and ugly. "Sutton, I'm not angry at you. You didn't know. Mom and Dad told you that you were going to be CEO of a company they had the authority to give you. That was a lie they told you, and I'm sorry they told it. But you do not work here. You have never worked here. The cease and desist that was delivered to your hotel an hour ago stands. Please go back to New York. Houston, please go back to New York." She put her face in her hands. My mother put an arm around her. I turned to the 3 board members and the country club guests and the chairman emeritus of the competing firm. They were sitting very still. The chairman emeritus, a man named Boy Kettering, was a man who had built a real company and who knew, immediately and with absolute certainty, what had just happened in that room. "I apologize for the inconvenience this afternoon," I said. "If you'll excuse me, I have some work to do." I walked out. That was 18 months ago. I want to tell you a few things about what happened next, because I know that's what you're going to ask in the comments, and I'd rather just tell you. My father did not have another heart attack, although I think for a few days my mother was hoping he would, because it would have given her something to organize. He kept his 11% preferred. He sends me a Christmas card every year now. We do not speak otherwise. I think he is ashamed. I think shame is a luxury he can afford because he has never had to live without it. My mother and I have lunch once a month at a tea room in Wintka. We do not discuss the company. We discuss her garden, which is genuinely lovely, and her book club, which is reading mostly British mysteries this year. She has never apologized. I have stopped expecting her to. There is a peace in that I did not anticipate. My sister moved back to Manhattan. She started her own consulting business, which I gather is doing fine. We had one long, difficult phone call about 6 months after the announcement, in which she told me she had not known what our parents were planning, and I told her I believed her, and she told me she was sorry, and I told her I knew. We are not close. I don't know if we ever were, really, but we are no longer enemies. That is probably the most I can ask for, and probably more than most people in my position get. Reinhardt Aeronautic Systems closed our Series D in March at a valuation of $760 million. We are profitable. We employ 491 people. Our flight stabilization software is used by 23 regional carriers and 4 international ones. None of their planes have crashed. I bought my grandmother's old house in Champaign last year. I am restoring it slowly, one room at a time. There was a small office in the back that used to be a sewing room, and I have set up her old ThinkPad on the desk just for show. It does not power on anymore. That is all right. It does not need to. People ask me, sometimes in interviews, what I learned from all of this. They want a clean answer. They want a quote they can put on a slide. I never know what to tell them, because the truth is messier than a slide. What I learned is that the people who tell you they love you will sometimes also tell you that you are not enough. And sometimes those two things will be true at the same time. And the work, the real work, is not to make them stop saying the second thing. The work is to build a life in which the second thing cannot reach you. My grandmother told me to build something nobody could take from me. I thought she meant the company. I think now she meant me. I think about that conference room more than I expected to. Not the moment I walked back in, not the brass nameplate going into the waste bin, not even the color draining out of my father's face. I think about the 23-minute drive between the parking garage and Ferris's office, because everything that happened that afternoon had already been decided 6 years before, on a snowy night on I-94, when I made one phone call instead of crying into my steering wheel. That is what nobody tells you about consequences. They don't arrive in the moment. They are planted years earlier, quietly, in small choices nobody applauds you for. My father planted his consequence in 2014 when he wrote a check and didn't read the paperwork. My mother planted hers across 1,000 Sunday dinners where she taught my sister that charm was a substitute for work. My sister planted hers by accepting a crown she had not earned. And I planted mine by listening, finally, to my grandmother, who told me to build something nobody could scratch my name off of. If I have learned anything worth passing on, it is that the woman who walks out of that conference room is built from 3 quiet things, and none of them are luck. The first is a refusal to lie, especially to yourself. I knew at 26 that my parents would try to take what I had built. I did not want to know that. I wanted to believe in them the way every daughter wants to believe in her parents. But I let myself see it, and I acted on what I saw. And I did not pretend it was something it was not. That kind of honesty with yourself is not cruelty. It is the foundation everything else gets built on. The second is the willingness to think clearly when feeling badly. I was exhausted that night in the snowstorm. I was 26, and my father had just humiliated me at his own dinner table. The easy thing would have been to drink a glass of wine and go to bed. Instead, I made a phone call that took 18 months of unglamorous, expensive, careful work to follow through on. Nobody saw that work. Nobody clapped for it. It happened in spreadsheets and Delaware filings and Sunday afternoons reading bylaws. Real intelligence is mostly stubbornness wearing a better suit. The third is the kind of endurance that does not look like endurance from the outside. For 6 years, I sat across from my parents at holiday dinners and said nothing about the cap table. I did not weaponize what I knew. I did not threaten. I simply continued to build the company and to confirm Ferris's 6-month email and to wait. Patience is not passive. Patience is the most active thing a person can do because every day you choose, again, not to flinch. My grandmother told me to put my name on something they couldn't scratch off. I think she was talking about more than the company. I think she was talking about the woman who could walk out of that conference room without raising her voice. That is the only thing I have ever truly built.